Yeah, if you want to call it overhaul. Bought an item of machinery. The item of machinery has a life of 30 years. The machinery will need to have a major overhaul every 3 years. Now the cost of the overhaul is 12 million, which comprises some for parts and some for labour. The directors of HAR are proposing to capitalise the cost of the major overhaul by accruing for its cost by making an annual provision of 4. So they are going to incur a liability of 12 in 3 years' time, and going to have to spend 12 in 3 years' time. So what they're suggesting is every year they should debit the P&L by 4, no, debit plant by 4, credit the provision by 4. And we have to discuss the appropriateness of the accounting treatment. This is my answer. I love what is being proposed. The accounting treatment is perfectly correct. I've got nothing more to say. Thank you very much. It's never going to be the case, is it? Yeah? It's very, very rare that the examiner does a double bluff and actually does something that's correct. What he's normally asking you to comment on is rubbish. Why is it rubbish to make a provision of 4? He is saying, let's make a provision of 4, let's make a provision of 4, let's make a provision of 4, so in 3 years' time it will become 12. Why is that rubbish?
Because it should be uncertain according to the standard of IAS 37.
I think the cost is uncertain. I think the cost of the overhaul could be 13 or could be 11. I'm very happy that it is it is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. I'm happy that it is meeting the definition of a provision.
I think it's not, because we know it's 4 million, right? And we haven't seen anything like this in F7, so that doesn't make sense to me.
There's a talk about discounting. All right, I'm half with you on discounting. Tell me what you would rather do. Okay, if we're going to make a provision, then we recognise the liability in full. If we're going to recognise a provision, we recognise a provision of 12. Please, if there's going to be a provision, it's 12. Then you discount the 12 to make it slightly smaller. Don't give me this 4, 4, 4. If you did a balance sheet after a year and showed a liability of 4, there is no liability of 4. There's an obligation to sort it out at 12, but there's never a liability at 4. Ladies, I don't know, should I say this? Oh, I'm going to say it anyway. You're either pregnant or you're not. Yeah? You either have a liability or you don't. All right? So none of this, a quarter, none of this a third. But guys, we're missing the point. It's a little bit about provisions. What do we say about major overhaul expenditure? We will depreciate the asset for 3 years. We've just bought a brand new asset. And part of the cost of that asset only has a 3-year life. There's no provision going to be made at all. If you were going to make a provision at 12, discount it. But there is no present obligation because the asset doesn't need overhauling yet. You don't make a provision for future repairs. This is a complex asset. Part of the asset has a life of 3 years, and part of the asset has a life of 30 years. So the part of the asset with 3 years, you just depreciate, but you cannot make a provision for future repairs. Let us make a brief note. Let us make a brief note before we break for 30 in prep. So, discuss the appropriateness, yeah? There should be no provision. There should be no provision made for the future cost of the overhaul. There is no past event. There is no past event. So no liability arises. So no liability arises. So there should be no provision made for the cost, for the future cost of the overhaul. There is no past event, so no liability arises. This is a complex asset. This is a complex asset to be depreciated in 2 parts. To be depreciated in 2 parts. If we say the total cost is 100, the 12 would be written off over 3 years, and the balance of 88 is written off over 30 years. So this is a complex asset to be depreciated in 2 parts. Part of the asset is only going to last 3 years. So that part of the asset is depreciated over 3 years. When you incur the cost of refurbishment in 3 years' time, you capitalize that cost. When the overhaul expenditure write-off. So the 12 is written off over 3 years because that part of the asset has a. Imagine it's a cinema, and what you want to do with the cinema is every 3 years reupholster the seats, put the carpets in. So you buy the cinema brand new, yeah, and you've got the cost of the cinema, but you know that every 3 years you're going to have to replace the seats, replace the bulbs, replace the carpets. So give it a major overhaul. So that part of the asset only has a life of 3 years, but the building, the fabric, that has a life of 30 years. So you're not making a provision for the cost of buying the new furniture. So when the overhaul expenditure is incurred, capitalize the cost. Capitalize the cost. Capitalize the cost. Interesting. Interesting. Thank you for your patience. But I'm going to suggest that we now take a 15-minute break, and we will resume by looking again at a little bit of PPE, a little bit of borrowing costs, yeah, a little bit of investment property, a little bit of government grants, a little bit of intangible assets, lots more things to do this evening. But for now, I can see it's 5:45, so we need to take a break.